All right, let's get ready to think big today. We're about to dive into, well, the value of life itself.
Heavy stuff, right?
Yeah, not exactly light podcast material, but I think this deep dive is going to be much more engaging than you'd think.
I agree. This isn't just some philosophical debate. It's about how we actually live,
Uh,
you know, the choices we make, what we find meaning in, all that.
Absolutely. And to help us unpack all this, we're looking at an academic paper. It's called The Foundation of Life's Value.
Catchy title.
Right. And it's fascinating because it blends all these different perspectives, philosophy, psychology, even a bit of biology to really tackle this question.
And one of the big ideas it puts forward is that there are two main contenders, you could say, for what gives life value.
Experiences and emotions.
And it's the combination of those, what we go through and how we feel about it, that gets to the heart of things.
Okay, so the paper starts off talking about experiences as like the foundation of a good life. It's through experiences that we learn, grow, connect with the world.
Right.
Like, think about it. The first time you had a perfectly ripe strawberry, or you saw an incredible sunset.
Those are experiences that shape how you see pleasure, beauty, even.
Exactly. And from a more logical standpoint, I guess, experiences are how we get knowledge, right?
For sure. And the paper uses this example of seeing a shooting star, and then maybe that makes you curious about astronomy.
So the experience is valuable because it made you learn something new.
Yeah, expands your understanding of the universe.
So knowledge is good, building understanding, that all has value. But is just knowing things enough to make life feel worthwhile? I don't know.
That's where the emotions come in, right? The paper argues that emotions add this whole other level to experiences, like that sunset we were talking about.
It's not just the colors, it's the feeling you get from it.
Awe, peace, maybe even a little sadness. That's what makes it stick with you.
Like the emotions transform those moments into something we cherish. And, the paper also says that emotions are what connect us to other people. Sharing joy, being there for someone when they're grieving, even just feeling understood, those connections make life richer, more meaningful.
And then it raises a really interesting question. What about people who have trouble experiencing or expressing emotions? The paper mentions this condition called alexithymia.
Where it's hard for them to even identify what they're feeling.
Right. So does that mean their lives are less valuable?
Whoa. It's a big question. Makes you think about what's really essential for a meaningful life.
Yeah, no easy answers there.
Eh,
But it gets you thinking, right?
for sure. And maybe we can shift gears a bit. I know the paper spends a lot of time talking about how humans are social creatures. Like, interaction is key.
Yeah, it makes a big deal about that, yeah. Whether it's super emotional connections or just shared goals and interests, that kind of thing.
It had some interesting examples, like shared rituals.
Holidays with family or ceremonies, mourning a loss together, all that.
And that makes you feel like you belong, gives you a sense of shared meaning.
Exactly. Reminds you you're part of something bigger. And it's not all about tradition either. Working together towards a common goal can be really fulfilling.
Like a scientific discovery or overcoming some challenge in your community.
Makes you feel like your efforts matter.
But wait, what about introverts? We know people who love being alone, find meaning in their own personal things.
Good point.
Hmm.
And the paper actually addresses that. It says that solo reflection, personal growth, that stuff's valuable too.
So it's not one size fits all then.
No. The key, it seems, is to find your way to connect with something larger than yourself. Could be through being part of a community or your own personal exploration. Whatever works.
Makes sense. Now, I noticed the paper gets a little bit scientific at one point. Talks about evolution and the role of emotions.
Right, like fear keeps us safe, joy makes us seek out good things.
It's like those emotions develop to help us survive.
Makes sense biologically. But is that all there is to it? I mean, humans do a lot more than just survive, right?
We create art, we think about philosophy, things that don't seem to have an obvious biological payoff.
So where does that value come from?
Big questions. And the paper actually brings in some heavy hitters from the world of philosophy to help us with this. Sartre and Viktor Frankl.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of them, but could use a refresher.
Same here. Can you give us a quick rundown?
Sure. Sartre was all about freedom. He said, we're responsible for creating our own meaning through our choices and actions.
So it's not about finding meaning out there somewhere. It's about making it yourself.
Exactly. You're the author of your own story. And Frankl, he was all about finding meaning even when things are rough. He said, even in suffering, you have the power to choose your attitude, find purpose.
Powerful stuff, especially these days. But how does all that individual focus fit in with ideas about the greater good? Like, what about philosophies that say we should prioritize everyone's well-being, not just our own happiness?
The paper brings up utilitarianism for that.
Utilitarianism, right.
Right.
Remind me what that is again.
Basically, it says the best choice is the one that makes the most people happy, maximizes overall well-being, even if it means some individuals have to sacrifice something.
So it's like, do you focus on making yourself happy or on making a world where everyone can thrive? Individual meaning versus the greater good.
Yeah, tough choices.
Yeah.
And the paper doesn't give you a straight answer. Acknowledges that both sides have valid points. Makes you think, right?
It does. It's like we have to consider both sides of the equation, individual and collective. And that's where things start to get really interesting. So we're back, diving deep into the value of life. And before the break, we were left with this big question. If life's value really is about how complex it is, what does that mean for each of us trying to find our own meaning?
Right. And it's a question that could keep us going for hours, honestly. But I think the key here is that there's no single right answer. The paper keeps saying how the value of life isn't some preset thing.
So instead of looking for some universal formula for a good life, maybe we should each focus on what makes our lives feel valuable.
Exactly. It's more personal that way, right? More about appreciating all the different experiences and emotions that make up a human life, yours included.
Makes me think about the people who have trouble with emotions, like we were talking about before. Alexithymia.
Right, where it's tough for them to even recognize what they're feeling.
Yeah.
The paper uses that as a challenge to our assumptions. Like, if someone doesn't have that emotional depth, does that make their life less meaningful?
It's a good question to ask. Makes you wonder if emotions are really the only thing that matters. What do you think?
Well, the paper seems to say that while emotions are important, they're not the whole story.
So what else contributes to that feeling of value, if not just emotions?
It talks a lot about finding connection, finding your purpose, even if it's not tied to those big emotional moments.
So someone could find a lot of satisfaction in, I don't know, mastering some skill or working for a cause they care about, even if they don't feel a ton of emotion along the way.
Yeah, exactly. Their sense of meaning might come from a more, intellectual place or from a sense of duty. And that's totally valid.
It's not like we're ranking people based on how emotional they are. And this goes back to that whole freedom and choice thing, right?
For sure. We get to decide what matters to us and build a life that feels good based on that.
I like that. It's empowering, knowing we have a say in what gives our lives meaning, but how do we actually do that? Turn that idea into action?
Well, the paper doesn't give you a step-by-step guide because that would defeat the purpose of making your own choices. But there are some good insights in there to get us started.
Okay, I'm listening.
Yeah.
What does it say?
One thing is to really pay attention to your experiences. Not just going through life on autopilot, but noticing what makes you happy, what makes you curious, what pushes you to grow.
So, be present and enjoy those things that make you feel alive.
Yeah, don't let life just pass you by. It's about noticing those moments that give you meaning, even the small ones. That morning coffee, a good conversation, those add up.
I get that. Being more present helps you see the value in those everyday moments. But what about the bigger picture? How do we find that sense of purpose, that connection to something beyond ourselves?
The paper really stresses knowing your values, what you truly believe in.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? Connect with those beliefs?
It can look like a lot of things. For some people, it means getting involved in their community, volunteering, working towards a goal that helps others, using their skills to make a difference.
Finding ways to put your passion into action.
Right.
Even small actions.
Exactly. For other folks, that purpose might come from more internal stuff. Spirituality, being creative, just understanding themselves and the world better. It all counts.
So outward action or inner growth, both work. It sounds like this search for meaning, it's more like a journey, not a destination.
Totally. And it's different for everyone, moving at its own pace. No need to compare yourself to others.
This reminds me of all the different ways people find meaning. Some through work, some through family, hobbies, their beliefs. There are so many ways.
And that's what's so great about it. No right or wrong way. The paper just encourages you to be open, explore, and realize that what gives your life meaning might change over time.
What matters at one point might not matter as much later on. And that's not a bad thing. It's growing.
Exactly. It's how it should be. The important thing is to keep asking those big questions about what makes life valuable and be willing to adjust your course as you go.
So, big picture from this paper, What should we be thinking about as we continue this whole meaning of life journey? What are the big takeaways?
Well, I think the biggest one is that the value of life isn't just given to you. You create it through your choices, experiences, relationships, everything you do in the world.
It's like we're all artists, and our lives are the canvases we get to paint on.
What a great way to put it. And like any masterpiece, a meaningful life takes time, effort. You have to embrace the good and the bad that come with the process. Not always easy, but it's worth it.
I like that. But hold on, we're not done yet. There's one more really important part of this paper we haven't talked about, and it might surprise some people. It's the role of logic, being rational in all of this. Can thinking things through, using your head, actually help you find meaning? Or is it all about emotions and experiences like a lot of folks believe?
That's a great question to end on, and it's what we'll be looking at in the last part of our deep dive. Stick with us.
All right, we're back for the final part of our deep dive. We've talked about experiences, emotions, relationships, even gotten a little philosophical. But now we're going to bring in something that might surprise some people.
The power of rationality.
Exactly. Thinking things through, using logic. Can that actually help us find meaning?
It's a good question. A lot of folks think it's all about feelings and big moments, but the paper we're discussing actually challenges that.
Yeah, it really stuck out to me. Like maybe there's another way, one that's more about making thoughtful choices.
And there's some good examples in the paper to back this up. It talks about how some philosophies, like utilitarianism, really emphasize using reason to do the most good for the most people.
Utilitarianism, right. That's one that always gets me thinking. For those who need a refresher, it's basically the idea that the best choice is the one that makes the most people happy.
Yeah, it's about looking at the big picture, not just individual feelings. And it brings up an interesting point. It suggests that just doing good things, making choices that benefit others, can have value in itself.
So it's not just about how you feel, it's about the impact you have.
Exactly.
I can see how living a rational life, like making choices that help others, could give you a sense of purpose, even if it doesn't involve a ton of emotion.
Yeah, it might be a quieter kind of meaning, but still important.
For sure. And think about how many examples we see of this every day. Scientists making discoveries that improve people's lives, governments trying to be fair and just, even just random acts of kindness.
All of that adds up to a world that's more meaningful.
Right. It's like we're tapping into a different source of energy, one that's less about fleeting feelings and more about making a real difference.
I like that. And it's not that we should ignore our emotions, they're part of who we are. But the paper seems to say that the best way to live is to use both emotions and rationality.
So it's not one or the other, it's finding that balance.
Yeah, you don't have to choose between following your heart or your head.
Think of it like this. Emotions are like the fuel, the energy that drives us. But rationality, that's like the map that helps us get where we want to go.
A car needs both a good engine and a good driver to reach its full potential.
Perfect analogy. So emotions give us the why, the things we care about, our goals. And rationality gives us the how, the strategy, planning, thinking about consequences.
Exactly. And that ties back to what we were saying about how different people find meaning in different ways. Some are more driven by emotions, others by logic and responsibility.
It's about finding what works for you, honoring both your head and your heart. And that reminds me, we talked about having the freedom to define what matters most to us.
Right. The paper really emphasizes that.
Yeah.
It's empowering to know we have that choice, even while trying to balance emotions and logic.
So it's not about fitting into someone else's idea of a good life. It's about figuring out what resonates with you. This is all great, but how do we actually put it into practice? Does the paper give us any specific advice?
It doesn't lay out a step-by-step plan, because remember, individual choice is key. But there's some good points to think about.
I'm all ears.
One thing it says is to really look at your beliefs and values. Are they really yours? Or did you just pick them up from your family or society? Have you actually thought about them?
Like taking a look at your internal compass, making sure it's pointing you in the right direction.
Yeah, and not just blindly following beliefs you've never questioned. It's about being deliberate, making sure they fit with who you are and what you want to contribute to the world.
I get that. It's so easy to just go through life without thinking about those things. But making that effort to really examine your values, that can lead to better choices.
Absolutely. And the paper also talks about making decisions with both logic and empathy. Not just thinking about the practical outcomes, but also how your choices affect other people.
So it's weighing the pros and cons with your head, but also checking in with your heart to make sure you're not being heartless about it.
Exactly. Using both head and heart to make choices that are wise and kind.
I'm starting to see how powerful this combination of logic and emotion can be. It's not just about making the smartest choice. It's about making one that feels right on a deeper level.
And as the paper suggests, that effort, that trying to find balance, is a big part of what makes life valuable.
So after this deep dive into what makes life worth living, what are the big things we should remember? It feels like we've covered a lot.
I think the most important takeaway is that there's no one right answer, no magic formula for a good life.
It's about enjoying the journey with all its ups and downs.
Yes, the value of life is in its complexity. It's about how all those things we talked about, experiences, emotions, relationships, choices, logic, and our search for purpose all come together.
And we have the power to shape what that means for each of us. We're not just along for the ride, we're creating it.
That's a great way to put it. So as we wrap things up, I want to leave our listeners with a question to think about. If the value of life is really about this complexity, this mix of everything, what combination are you going to use to build a life that feels meaningful to you?
That's a great question to leave everyone with. And remember, the journey itself is part of what makes life worth living. So embrace the complexity, keep asking questions, and keep exploring what it means to live a truly fulfilling life. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.